in terms of the innate immune system, there are also several small proteins that are involved in your innate immune response. Those small proteins are called antimicrobials. And those small proteins, again, are relatively nonspecific as far as how they work. You don't get an increase in your antimicrobial peptides circulating if you are exposed to the same pathogen over and over again. You get the same level of response each time, and that's part of the key of the innate immune system, is that the response doesn't get greater the more you're exposed to something. That's going to be something that we'll talk about that's going to be different associated with the acquired immune response. All right? So in terms of those antimicrobials, I've got really 3 types or categories that I want you to focus on. The first are going to be the interferons. All right? Interferons are small proteins. Typically, these tend to be more antiviral in nature than they do targeting bacteria, although that's a bit of an overstatement, okay? The interferons we have interferon alpha, interferon beta. These 2 interferons are the ones that are primarily antiviral in nature. So if you have a viral infection, your immune system will pump up the level of these small proteins of the interferons, in particular interferon alpha and beta, to target that viral infection. All right? And then there is also interferon gamma. This one is a little bit different from alpha and beta. And in terms of interferon gamma, as I try and make new words here, all right, because you don't have enough to remember already. Interferon gamma increases neutrophils and macrophages propensity to undergo to phagocytose foreign molecules. So interferon gamma ups essentially that part of your innate immune system, the macrophages, so that they're really functioning at a higher level. They're kind of always on patrol, on guard, ready to go. All right? So in terms of the interferons, I want you to know alpha, beta, gamma, which targets which, what happens with interferon alpha, interferon beta, interferon gamma. Okay? Second antimicrobial that we're going to talk about are going to be the defensins. All right? The defensins are really kind of neat. Okay? These are small proteins. They're about 100 amino acids in size, which in the protein world is not very big. All right? And in terms of defensins, where you'll have a lot of these are going to be associated with the lymphoid tissue within the gut. All right? So defensins are actually going to be important in targeting bacterial invasion. So in terms of those defensins, essentially what we've got, right, we've got our normal cell membrane here. I'm going to make these kind of small. All right, so this is going to be the normal cell membrane on your prokaryotic cell. Okay, so we're talking about targeting the prokaryotic cells here. All right, what those defensins do Oop, I kind of drew that but that's okay. They're small proteins And what's key about defensins, let's do them in pink. Is that because they're small peptides, they're able to kind of wiggle in between those phospholipids of the cell membrane. And essentially what they do is they generate an opening or a pore in the cell membrane, all right? And in terms of that, if you start making a cell membrane leaky, that's not going to be good for that particular cell, all right? And in this case, we're targeting our prokaryotic cell. So what ends up happening, you've got a pore there, you start getting contents from inside the cell leaking out. So those defensins kind of create a pore or a hole in the bacterial cell membrane, open things up, things leak out, all right? The defensins are kind of a catch-all. There's actually a whole family of defensins out there. There are tons of small proteins out there that are doing this kind of work within your body, all right? And in terms of those antimicrobial peptides, this one associates with the plasma cell membrane to essentially create a hole and everything leaks out of that bacterial cell, okay? So these two are relatively easy, all right? The third small protein or antimicrobial that we're going to talk about is going to be complement, all right? And you may have noticed there's another video after this on complement because I've got a little more detail that I want you to know about complement, all right? But in terms of that complement, we're talking more than 30 different proteins that are circulating in the bloodstream, all right? And in terms of that complement, all right, it's going to be triggered by a couple different pathways, but the one I'm primarily going to focus on is it's going to be triggered by antibodies. And this is where teaching the immune system gets a little dodgy because I haven't officially talked to you about antibodies yet. But in terms of those antibodies I'm going to draw frequently. They're going to look kind of like a Y. All right, this is an antibody here. Essentially what that antibody does is it's a protein that goes around and it's looking for a specific epitope. So in terms of the antibodies we're talking about here, you might imagine those antibodies are targeting the PAMPs that we talked about last week. All right. So in terms of that, looking for those pathogen-associated molecular markers on the outside of those bacterial cells, that can be one thing that can trigger the complement response. All right. And in terms of that, this is one way that the body can distinguish between bacteria that are part of our normal flora and bacteria that are pathogenic. Okay. So in terms of that, looking for those specific markers is one way that our body is able to recognize and kind of sort that out, okay? So in terms of complement, this is going to be something circulating within the blood. The thing about complement and the complement proteins is those proteins are what's known as highly labile, all right? That labile just means it's prone to denaturing very easy, all right? So in terms of an immune response, this is another end of the immune response where a fever can actually be detrimental, all right? Because that fever that you get, you're going to start to destroy the proteins associated with the complement response that we'll talk about in the next video. and you're taking out essentially one arm or one part of your innate immune response by having a fever. All right. Now, in terms of that, we're talking about the higher grade fevers, knocking out the complement. All right. So in terms of the antimicrobial proteins, the three types of antimicrobial proteins I want you to know are the interferons, the defensins, and complement. All right. I've got a little more detail to go into with complement in the next video, but if you have any questions, please let me know.